The first sound Claire Bennett heard was the screaming. At first she thought it was coming from somewhere down the hallway of the private hospital wing, maybe another patient in pain. Maybe a machine malfunctioning somewhere behind the polished white walls of the Bennett Medical Center. The hospital belonged to her husband's family, funded with money that flowed through the Bennett syndicate like blood through arteries, and it was supposed to be the safest place in the city. But the screaming wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the machine beside her bed. The monitor shrieked like a wounded animal, a long piercing alarm that sliced through the quiet of the dimly lit hospital suite. Claire tried to lift her head, but her body felt like it was sinking into the mattress, heavy and distant, as if gravity itself had suddenly doubled. "Mrs. Bennett, stay with me." The doctor's voice cut through the fog. Claire blinked slowly, her vision swimming. The room looked wrong. To many people. Too much movement. Nurses rushed back and forth around the bed, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor while metal trays rattled and equipment beeped frantically. What's happening?" Claire whispered. Her voice sounded small, like it belonged to someone else. Dr. Alina Morgan leaned over her, eyes sharp and serious behind thin glasses. "Claire, listen to me very carefully. Your placenta has ruptured. It's separating from the uterine wall." Claire didn't understand the words at first. They floated around her like pieces of a language she almost recognized. Then the doctor said the next sentence. "Your babies are losing oxygen." The world tilted. Claire's hand flew to her swollen stomach, fingers trembling as she pressed gently against the curve where two small lives were supposed to be safe. Her twins. Her babies. Grace and Henry. She had chosen the names weeks ago while folding tiny blankets in the nursery. Derek barely ever stepped into Grace, Eleanor, and Henry James. She whispered them every night before she fell asleep, imagining the day she would finally hold them. "They'll be okay," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "Right there, okay?" Dr. Morgan didn't answer immediately. The silence was worse than the alarm. "Your blood pressure is crashing," the doctor finally said. "We need to perform an emergency C-section right now." The words struck Claire like ice water. Right now. But Derek Claire's voice cracked. "My husband needs to sign the consent." One of the nurses already had Claire's phone in her hand. "I'm calling him," she said quickly, pressing the phone to her ear. The room filled with the soft sound of ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. Then Derek Bennett's recorded voice answered cheerfully. "Hey, you've reached Derek. Leave a message." The nurse hung up immediately and dialed again. Claire stared at the ceiling, blinking hard against the sudden burn of tears. Derek never ignored her calls. Not when it mattered. Not when she was this close to giving birth to the heirs of the Bennett syndicate. He had been distant lately, sure. Late nights, secretive meetings, long stretches where he barely spoke to her. But this was different. Ring, ring, voicemail, Mr. Bennett. "This is Bennett Medical Center," the nurse said urgently into the phone. "Your wife is experiencing a life-threatening emergency. We need you here immediately." She hung up, dialed again. Nothing. Claire's chest tightened. "Try again," she whispered. The nurse did. 4 times. 5 times. 6. Each unanswered ring cracked something inside Claire's chest. The foundation of certainty she had built her life on began to fracture in quiet, terrifying pieces. Dr. Morgan placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Claire, we can't wait any longer. Your babies are in distress and you're losing blood. If we don't operate now, you could lose them, and you could die." The word hung in the air like smoke. Die. Claire's fingers curled against her stomach as another wave of pain ripped through her body. Her heart hammered against her ribs, while the machine screamed louder beside her. "Derek will answer," she insisted weakly. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. The nurse dialed again. 7, 8, 9. "Nothing, Mrs. Bennet," the doctor said softly. "We need consent." Claire closed her eyes. Images flashed through her mind, tiny cribs in the nursery. Soft yellow blankets folded neatly on shelves. Derek standing beside her during the first ultrasound, pretending to smile when they learned there were 2 heartbeats instead of 1. Grace and Henry, her babies. If they waited any longer, they might not survive. The door to the hospital suite burst open so suddenly the nurses jumped. Claire's eyes flew open. Hope surged through her chest. Derek, but the man standing in the doorway wasn't her husband. He was taller, broader, dressed in a dark tailored suit that looked like it had been thrown on in a hurry. His black hair slightly disheveled, and his expression carved from something harder than stone. Nathan Grayson. Even through the haze of pain and fear, Claire recognized him instantly. Every person in the city's underworld knew that name. Nathan Grayson was the only man powerful enough to challenge the Bennett Syndicate. The rival Mafia boss Derek hated more than anyone else alive. The room went still. Dr. Morgan frowned. "Sir, this is a private. I know exactly where I am," Nathan said calmly. His voice was low, controlled, dangerous. He stepped further into the room, his sharp eyes taking in the chaos, the flashing monitors, the blood pressure alarms, Claire pale and shaking on the bed. "What are you doing here?" Claire managed to whisper. Nathan's gaze met hers. "Your friend Becca called me," he said. Claire blinked in confusion. "She couldn't reach your husband." The words landed heavily in the room. Nathan pulled a folded document from inside his jacket and placed it on the bedside table. "I'm signing the consent forms," he said. Dr. Morgan hesitated. "You're not family." Nathan's eyes hardened. "Then we're going to pretend we didn't have this conversation while you save 3 lives." The monitor screamed again. Dr. Morgan looked down at Claire. "It's your choice." Claire's chest rose and fell rapidly as she stared at Nathan Grayson, her husband's greatest enemy, the stranger who had shown up when Derek had not. Another wave of pain tore through her body and the machines shrieked louder. Grace, Henry, her babies. Claire reached out blindly and Nathan stepped forward, taking her hand without hesitation. His grip was steady, warm, real. "Don't leave," she whispered. Nathan's voice was quiet but unbreakable. "I won't." Claire turned her head toward the doctor. "Do it," she said. "Save my babies." The doors of the operating room slammed shut behind Claire Bennett as the surgical team rushed her inside, leaving Nathan Grayson standing alone in the silent corridor with the echo of the monitor's dying scream still ringing in his ears. For a moment, the powerful Mafia boss did not move. The hospital hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and polished marble, a strange contrast to the violence of the underworld he usually ruled. Nathan stared at the red surgical light above the door as if it were a ticking clock counting down a life he had no right to protect and yet could not walk away from. He had come here expecting a negotiation, maybe a confrontation with Derek Bennett over territory disputes that had simmered between their syndicates for years. Instead, he had walked into a nightmare. Pregnant woman bleeding out while the city's most powerful crime heir ignored every desperate call. Nathan pulled out his phone and dialed the only number he knew Derek would answer if pride alone forced him to. The phone rang once, twice, then switched to voicemail with the same cheerful greeting the nurses had heard earlier. Nathan ended the call slowly, his jaw tightening until a muscle ticked beneath the skin. Something about the silence on the other end of that call felt wrong. Not accidental, but deliberate, and Nathan had built his empire by trusting instincts that most men ignored. He tapped another number, and his chief investigator answered immediately. Within minutes, the truth began unfolding piece by piece, like a dark puzzle revealing itself under harsh light. Derek Bennett was not missing, trapped in traffic, or unreachable in some emergency meeting. He was sitting in the private lounge of the Iron Crown Casino downtown, drinking champagne beneath crystal chandeliers, while a violin quartet played in the background. And he was not alone. The woman with him was Vanessa Hartley, his personal assistant, 6 months pregnant and smiling across the table while Derek rested his hand possessively on her stomach. Nathan felt something cold move through his chest, something that reminded him of a winter night 5 years earlier when he had stood alone beside an incubator, watching his newborn daughter struggle to breathe. The memory hit him with brutal clarity. The hospital lights, the hollow silence of an empty hallway, the knowledge that the woman who had promised to love him had already walked away because grief made him inconvenient. Nathan had never spoken about that night to anyone, but the ghost of it lived in his bones. And now he found himself staring again at another operating room door behind, which 2 unborn lives were fighting to survive, while their father toasted the future of another family. His phone buzzed again with photographs arriving from his investigator. Time-stamped images of Derek and Vanessa laughing, clinking glasses, oblivious to the hospital alarms echoing across the city. Nathan slipped the phone back into his pocket without replying, his expression turning into something quiet and lethal. Behind the operating room door, doctors were racing against time, cutting through blood and fear to save a woman who had chosen to trust the worst enemy of her husband. And for reasons Nathan did not yet fully understand, that choice had placed a responsibility on his shoulders that he could not ignore. Hours crawled by before the surgical light finally flickered off and the doors opened again. The doctor stepping into the corridor with exhaustion etched across her face. Nathan stood immediately, the movement sharp and instinctive. For a brief, terrifying second, he saw hesitation in the doctor's eyes and thought of tiny heartbeats fading into silence. Then she spoke 3 words that seemed to change the air itself. "They're alive," she said, "both babies and the mother." Relief slammed into Nathan so suddenly his knees nearly gave way. But he caught himself against the wall and forced his breathing steady as the doctor continued, explaining the twins were small but breathing on their own. Fighters in every sense of the word. A nurse soon led him through a maze of hallways into the neonatal intensive care unit, where 2 fragile incubators waited beneath soft lights. And Nathan found himself staring down at the smallest humans he had ever seen, their chests rising and falling with stubborn determination, as if they had already inherited the strength of the woman who'd fought to bring them into the world. Grace and Henry, he whispered quietly after reading the names on their charts, and the strange promise he had made earlier in the chaos of the hospital room returned to him with surprising weight. Their father had chosen to abandon them before they even took their first breath. But Nathan Grayson knew something with absolute certainty as he stood beside those incubators. Derek Bennett had just made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. Claire Bennett woke slowly, as if she were rising from the bottom of a deep, dark ocean where sound and light had been swallowed by silence. At first there was nothing but the steady rhythm of a monitor beeping beside her bed and the faint, antiseptic scent that clung to the air of the hospital room. Her body felt hollow and heavy at the same time, the aftermath of surgery and blood loss leaving her limbs weak and distant. She tried to move, and pain flashed sharply across her abdomen, dragging her back into awareness with brutal clarity. Instinctively, her hands moved toward her stomach, and for one terrifying second she felt only emptiness where the weight of pregnancy had been. Panic surged through her chest until a voice nearby spoke softly, steady and reassuring. Becca Sullivan stepped into view, her eyes red from exhaustion but bright with relief. She took Claire's hand carefully, as if she were afraid the slightest pressure might break her. "The babies are alive," Becca whispered, and the words cracked something open inside Claire's chest. Grace and Henry had survived. The names echoed in her mind like a prayer she had whispered in the darkness while drifting toward unconsciousness. Tears slid silently down her temples as relief flooded through her veins. But the first question forming in her mind rose above everything else with painful urgency. Where is Derek? The room fell quiet in a way that felt immediately wrong. Becca hesitated, her gaze shifting briefly toward the door, before returning to Claire's face with a tight expression that did not belong in a moment that should have been joyful. Claire felt the answer before it was spoken, a cold understanding creeping slowly through the fragile peace she had just begun to feel. "He didn't come, did he?" she asked, her voice rough from dryness and disbelief. Becca swallowed before responding. "He called once while you were in surgery." The words seemed to echo in the sterile room like distant thunder. Claire blinked slowly, trying to process the meaning behind them. Called once. That meant he had known. He had known his wife was fighting for her life and had still chosen to remain somewhere else. Becca hesitated again before pulling Claire's phone from the bedside table and unlocking it with trembling fingers. "I think you need to see this," she said quietly. Claire watched the screen come alive as Becca turned it toward her. At first she saw only the single message from Derek sent while surgeons had been cutting her open to save their children. "I can't do this anymore. My lawyer will contact you. I'm sorry." The words looked strangely calm, almost polite, like a casual breakup text sent at the end of a relationship that had quietly faded away. But beneath that message was something worse. Becca scrolled down and an image filled the screen. A photograph taken beneath golden restaurant lights that glittered across crystal glasses and polished silverware. Derek sat across the table from a woman Claire recognized instantly. Vanessa Hartley, Derek's assistant. Derek's hand rested casually on Vanessa's swollen stomach while both of them smiled toward the camera. Champagne glasses raised in celebration as if the world belonged entirely to them. Claire stared at the image for a long moment without breathing. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes were showing her. Yet the timestamp printed across the bottom corner made the truth impossible to escape. The photo had been taken only hours earlier while she had been dying on an operating table. The realization settled slowly through her veins like poison, spreading outward until every memory of the past year began rearranging itself into something darker and more terrifying than betrayal alone. Derek hadn't simply ignored the calls. He had chosen not to answer them. Claire's hand trembled as she lowered the phone back onto the blanket beside her. For a long moment she felt nothing at all, only a strange hollow stillness where heartbreak should have been. Then the silence inside her chest hardened into something colder and sharper than grief. "How long?" she asked quietly, still staring at the ceiling as if the answer might be written there. Becca hesitated again before answering. From what Nathan's investigators found, Vanessa is about 6 months pregnant. Claire closed her eyes slowly, doing the silent calculation in her mind. 6 months meant Derek had been sleeping with his assistant while his wife was carrying twins. The man she had trusted with her life had been building another family behind her back while she decorated a nursery for the children he now seemed ready to abandon. When Claire finally opened her eyes again, the softness that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a calm that frightened even her closest friend. "Call Nathan Grayson," she said quietly. Becca blinked in surprise. "Why?" Because Claire turned her head slowly toward the door where the rival Mafia boss had stood hours earlier and saved 3 lives Derek had already abandoned. "Because if Derek Bennett has declared war on my life," she continued softly, "then I want the one man he fears most standing on my side when the battle begins." Nathan Grayson stood alone beside the panoramic window of the hospital's executive floor, the sprawling city stretching beneath him like a kingdom of glittering lights and hidden shadows. Midnight had already surrendered to the pale grey hint of morning, yet the city never truly slept, especially not the parts controlled by men like Derek Bennett. Nathan held his phone loosely in one hand while studying the reflection staring back at him from the glass. The rival Mafia boss who had built his empire through calculated patience and quiet brutality now found himself guarding the life of a woman he barely knew and 2 newborn heirs who carried the bloodline of his greatest enemy. Any strategist would call it madness. Yet Nathan had never been able to walk away from certain battles once they revealed themselves. His phone buzzed softly in his hand, the encrypted message arriving from one of his investigators. Nathan opened the file and read through the report with the calm focus of a man reviewing a war plan. Every line confirmed what his instincts had already begun to suspect during those long hours outside the operating room. Derek Bennett's financial empire was rotting from the inside. Dozens of shell companies had been created over the past year. Accounts opened and closed with alarming speed. Millions of dollars flowing through invisible corridors of money laundering, designed to hide losses that could cripple the Bennett syndicate if exposed. But the most disturbing detail lay buried within the transaction records themselves. Claire Bennett's name appeared across almost every forged signature authorizing those deals. Derek had not only been stealing money, he had been building a perfect legal trap designed to collapse on his own wife if the authorities ever came knocking. Nathan exhaled slowly, the faint reflection of his cold expression staring back from the window. Derek Bennett had never been a particularly intelligent man, but he had always been ruthless. This, however, crossed into something far darker than ambition. It was calculated destruction. A quiet knock at the door interrupted Nathan's thoughts before the handle turned and Claire Bennett stepped inside the office space that overlooked the hospital wing. She moved slowly, her body still weak from surgery, the pale hospital robe wrapped tightly around her frame. Yet the exhaustion in her eyes could not hide the sharp focus that had replaced the fragile confusion he had seen earlier that night. Claire Bennett looked different now. Something inside her had hardened while she slept. Nathan turned away from the window as she approached, studying her with careful attention. Most people broke when the truth shattered their lives. Claire looked like someone preparing for a war she had finally realized was already happening. "Thank you for saving my children," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the weight behind the words. Nathan nodded once. "You saved them," he replied calmly. "You fought for them before I ever arrived." Claire watched him for a moment, as if measuring something invisible beneath the surface of his calm exterior. Then she stepped closer, lowering herself carefully into the chair across from his desk. "Becca told me you've been investigating Derek's finances," she said. Nathan didn't bother denying it. He simply slid the tablet across the desk toward her and let the glowing screen illuminate the documents stacked against each other like evidence in a courtroom. Claire read in silence while the room filled with the quiet hum of hospital equipment beyond the walls. Her expression never changed as she absorbed the truth piece by piece. Forged signatures, hidden debt, offshore accounts disguised beneath her identity. When she finally looked up again, the calm in her eyes had transformed into something far more dangerous than heartbreak. "He planned this," she said softly. Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Yes," he answered. Claire's gaze drifted briefly toward the hallway where the neonatal intensive care unit waited behind secure doors. Grace and Henry slept there, unaware that their father had already tried to bury their future before they were even born. For several long seconds, Claire said nothing, her mind moving through the wreckage of the life she thought she had known. Then she looked back at Nathan with a quiet determination that made even the powerful Mafia boss pause. "Derek Bennett wanted a war," she said slowly. Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly. Claire folded her hands calmly in front of her. "Then let's make sure he loses it." The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty when Claire Bennett arrived the next afternoon. The soft hum of refrigerators and the distant clatter of trays, echoing through the quiet space like faint reminders of a world that continued moving while her own life had shattered and rebuilt itself in the span of a single night. She walked slowly, still healing from surgery, her body fragile but her mind sharper than it had ever been. Every step carried a strange mixture of exhaustion and purpose. The twins were safe upstairs in the neonatal intensive care unit, their tiny lungs learning to breathe in a world that had nearly lost them before they had taken their first breath. Claire had spent the morning sitting beside their incubators, watching their chests rise and fall, feeling the strange, fierce instinct of motherhood settle into her bones like armor. That instinct was the only thing keeping her steady now as she approached the small table near the window where Vanessa Hartley sat waiting. The woman looked smaller in person than Claire remembered, wrapped in a loose sweater that did little to hide the unmistakable curve of pregnancy beneath the fabric. Vanessa's fingers trembled slightly round the coffee cup in her hands, though the drink had clearly gone cold long ago. When she noticed Claire approaching, she stood quickly as if unsure whether she would be welcomed or attacked. For a moment, the two women simply stared at each other, the silence between them heavy with months of betrayal, manipulation, and misunderstandings. Neither of them had fully understood until now. Claire studied Vanessa carefully, searching her expression for arrogance or guilt, but what she saw instead was fear. The kind of fear that only appeared when someone realized they had been standing inside a trap all along. Vanessa finally spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." Claire remained standing, her arms folded protectively across her chest as she absorbed the words. "Sorry for sleeping with my husband, or sorry for helping him destroy my life?" she asked calmly. Vanessa flinched, the question landing harder than any accusation could have. "For both," she admitted quietly, "but also for believing him when he said you were the villain in this story." Claire felt a flicker of something cold pass through her chest. Derek had always been skilled at rewriting reality, turning his lies into convincing performances that made everyone around him doubt their own instincts. "What exactly did he tell you?" Claire asked. Vanessa swallowed before answering, her eyes dropping to the table as if she were ashamed of the memory. He said you trapped him with the pregnancy, that you didn't love him anymore, and that the twins were just another way to control him. The words lingered in the air like poison. Claire felt anger rise inside her, but it wasn't directed at the woman standing in front of her. It was aimed squarely at the man who had manipulated them both. Vanessa reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive, sliding it slowly across the table. When I realized what he'd done, I started recording everything, she said. Every conversation, every time he talked about hiding money or forging signatures under your name. Claire stared at the device without touching it. You're giving this to me. Vanessa nodded, her expression tightening with determination that hadn't been there before. Derek thinks he's untouchable because he's the heir to the Bennett syndicate. He thinks everyone will keep protecting him no matter what he does. She paused before meeting Claire's eyes again. But he's wrong. Claire finally picked up the flash drive, turning the small piece of plastic between her fingers while considering the weight of what it contained. Evidence, the kind that could bring down an empire. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. Vanessa placed one hand gently over her stomach, the protective gesture instinctive and unmistakable. Because I'm having his child too, she said. And I don't want my daughter growing up believing her father was a powerful man. I want her to know the truth. Claire felt something shift inside her as she looked at the woman across the table. For days she had imagined Vanessa as an enemy, the woman who had stolen her husband while she carried his children. But now she saw something entirely different. Another victim standing in the ruins Derek Bennett had created. Claire slid the flash drive into her pocket slowly. Then she looked back at Vanessa with a calm that carried the quiet promise of a coming storm. If you're telling the truth, she said softly, then Derek Bennett isn't just losing his family. He's about to lose everything. The meeting took place beneath a building that officially did not exist. From the outside, it was nothing more than an abandoned shipping warehouse on the river's industrial edge. Its rusted steel doors chained shut and its windows dark with years of neglect. But beneath the cracked concrete foundation, hidden behind reinforced vault doors and biometric locks, lay the true heart of the city's underworld. The council chamber of the syndicate was carved into the bedrock like an ancient throne room, a circular hall illuminated by low amber lights that cast long shadows across the polished stone table where the most dangerous men in the city gathered to decide the fate of empires. Nathan Grayson arrived last, as he always did, his presence filling the room with a quiet authority that forced even seasoned crime bosses to straighten slightly in their seats. Around the table sat the leaders of the 5 dominant families that controlled the city's black markets, shipping routes, gambling operations, and shadow banks. Every one of them understood that a crisis had dragged them out of hiding tonight. The Bennett syndicate was imploding, and when a dynasty that powerful collapsed, it rarely fell alone. At the far end of the table sat Derek Bennett, the man whose ambition had sparked the storm. He looked different than the confident heir who had once commanded fear across the underworld. His tailored suit still fit perfectly, and his hair was still slicked back with the same arrogant precision. But the tension in his shoulders betrayed the cracks forming beneath the surface. He watched Nathan carefully as the rival boss took his seat, the silence stretching between them like the moment before a gunshot. Finally, the oldest man in the room, Victor Salazar, tapped his ringed fingers against the table to call the gathering to order. His voice carried the gravelly weight of someone who had ruled the shadows for decades. We are here because accusations have been made against the Bennett family, he said slowly. Accusations that threaten the stability of this council. His eyes turned toward Nathan. You brought this matter forward. Speak. Nathan leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the stone table as if the weight of the entire chamber meant nothing to him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need. Derek Bennett has been laundering syndicate funds through shell corporations registered under his wife's name. He said calmly. The words landed like a grenade in the room. Several men exchanged sharp glances while Derek let out a quiet laugh that sounded forced even to his own ears. That's ridiculous, Derek said, leaning back in his chair.
If you enjoyed this story and want to watch the full version, you can continue it on my Patreon. On Patreon, you will find the complete story and many more exclusive stories, including alpha, mafia, and romance dramas. If you love deep emotional stories, powerful characters, and dramatic relationships, Patreon is where I share the full experience. Visit my Patreon to unlock the full story and support the channel. The Patreon link is available in the video description below.